All right, welcome everybody. Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm here in the AutoCrit studio, so to speak. I'm so excited to talk about some of the new tools that we've released here on AutoCrit, and ways that you can improve upon your writing, particularly when it comes to developing characters. We had a lot of requests for these tools. A lot of people are asking us, specifically when it comes to our analyzer and things like that, can we analyze characters? And now, indeed, yes, you can. But before I get into some of our new tools, I did want to discuss a little bit about characters in general and why they matter. Of course, we all know that characters are incredibly important when it comes to writing, when it comes to making an effective narrative. It is, it's kind of like that old cliche, the eyes are the windows to the soul. The characters really are our window into the story, right? It is how we resonate with what is going on because, we're human beings. We generally relate to other personalities, particularly other personalities that read as fairly human, which is why even when you're writing about like animals or aliens, they tend to take on pretty anthropomorphic tendencies, don't they? And that's because, yeah, this is how we relate to the world. If you are writing a hi- article about some big event that happens, right? Some tragic event, you often personify it, right? You bring it down to a personal story. Politicians, when they're talking about policies, what do they often do to persuade you? They bring it down to personal stories. And of course, at the heart of all of our books generally are personal stories, right? So even though we can kind of get bogged down in plot, if we have a mystery, it's like, who did it? Or if it's a sci fi story, it's like how this technology is going to work out or something like that. The important thing is we do not want to lose sight of those characters. It is, of course, the goal of every author to make those strong, indelible characters, the type of characters that somebody would want to dress up as, like for a Comic Con or something like that, right? Like, how do you get a better compliment than that? When somebody is so moved, so inspired by your characters, even characters they hate, right? They'll dress up as your villains or something like that because they find them so compelling. When you have a situation like that, you feel like you've I don't know. It's like, how do you surpass that, right? What could be a better feeling than that in terms of the acceptance of your art? So, how do we get there? How do we create those really strong characters? I went ahead and asked you some of the questions about some of the struggles that you have. So we have making the emotions come through without them coming off as melodramatic. Very true, right? It can be high. It can be very complex and difficult to show the audience what the character is feeling without droning on and on with a lot of emotional words and things like that, spelling it out so much that it comes across as over the top, right? How do you show dramatic uh, turns, and how do you show dramatic reactions? And we're going to show you that in just a second here. What else do we got here? Giving characters believable agency. This is a really great one. It can be all too easy to make your main characters particularly strong, particularly your main characters, right? There's the concept of the Mary Sue or the Gary Stew or something like that, where it's like they can do anything. And it's like they have so much abilities and they have so much power, and it's a wish fulfillment thing. Sure, but the more power you give them, the less believable they tend to be and the less relatable they tend to be. And that's even more important, right? It's hard for us to relate to somebody who doesn't seem to have any problems because they can just do everything because they're just that amazing, right? But there is a level of amazing that we like to see in our characters for wish fulfillment. So how do you find the balance? We're going to discuss about that as well. Hold on here. Well, I'm so glad to hear that other people are recommending you to jump on board AutoCrit. We have a wonderful community here of writers. So I wanted to start a little bit about theory, right? Before we get into the tools, it's important to understand what is underneath the tools, right? What are the philosophies that caused us to make these tools in the first place? So I wanted to do a quick little overview of how we tend to view characters around here in AutoCrit. When it comes to art, I often say when you study art, what you're really studying is how to talk about art. Nobody really can tell you how to do art exactly. Like they can tell you some of the tips and tricks and techniques about certain things, right? But, ultimately it's fairly subjective and it's a lot of practice, right? You can't just sit down and tell somebody how to play the violin and then they're great at it. No, no, they have to actually do the thing. And it's the same thing with writing. You actually have to sit down and write. So there's only so much of that I'll be able to help you kind of skip past. However, there are some basic concepts that are worth thinking about. And expanding your vocabulary to help you understand and analyze works that you love. I mean, here's the thing: you need to be able to understand when you really resonate with a book. Why did you like it so much? Why did you? Why did you respond? Right? Because if you don't know that, you're not going to necessarily know how to borrow those same sort of techniques, have the same sort of impact on somebody else. You want your character to be likable and believable. Awesome. Love that. All right. So, of course, we have our protagonist, our main character. Just a fancy word for that. It is the character who we are viewing the world through in terms of they are the character that is responsible for the decisions that are central to the story. So, ultimately, the success of whatever the story is concerned with rises or falls with the protagonist. Now, some people will argue maybe that your story has multiple protagonists, and that can be true sometimes. But I will say, for the most part, specifically anything written before the last half century, it's going to be very hard to find stuff that actually has true multiple protagonists. Might have multiple characters that play a role in the story, but there's generally one character where the success of the story rises or falls. And even now, when you have multiple points of view and you change chapters and you're in different people's heads, there's still often one person who is kind of ultimately where the buck stops, with the person with the most amount of responsibility. So I do recommend in general thinking about a central protagonist, even if you have multiple points of view. It just tends to make analyzing your character complement a lot easier. Now, of course, on the flip side of the protagonist is the antagonist. Now, I have it represented here by a traffic cone because the important thing to realize is that an antagonist is not necessarily a villain, it's an obstacle. So you have a main character that wants something, and then you have a obstacle that is in the way of what they want. Now, is what they want what they need? Not necessarily. And if it's what they want is what they need, the obstacle could in fact be successful, and that's fine. So an example with this would be like the movie Toy Story. Ultimately, Andy wants to be Woody. Woody wants to be Andy's favorite toy. That's what he wants. Is that what he needs? No, not really. He actually could use some friends that aren't Andy. He could have a more new, like a more, whatever you want to say, vibrant life, right? Not being so hyper focused and not being so competitive about it. And so Buzz Lightyear is the antagonist, and ultimately Buzz Lightyear kind of wins that story. He wins Woody over. This is a kind of typical buddy cop sort of format, or a hate to love romance often works like that. And that gets to somebody who's like, doesn't romance always need to have multiple protagonists? Well, if it's a hate to love, no, the hate relationship is going to be an antagonist. And in most romances, the other character, the love interest, is going to be another role, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Yes. What if you're writing a buddy cop dynamic duo story? I love it. Yeah, exactly. Right. If it is a initial animosity relationship, again, that character is going to be the antagonist to the main character. Right. And then they will make amends later. Right. There's a difference between multiple protagonists and multiple primary main characters, regardless of genres. All right. So, in somebody brought up romance. This is a really good example. When it comes to romance, it can be hate to love as the secondary viewpoint. The other one that often comes up is the relationship character. Now, the relationship character is not necessarily the person that they're going to actually form a love interest in. The point is they're the character that explains the relationship of the main character to the world. So they are the guardian, the mentor, the teacher. Their job in the story is to give the protagonist the information they need to get past the antagonist. If the main character knew this when they started the story, well, they wouldn't the antagonist wouldn't be any sort of obstacle. You would have no growth, right? Now, the relationship character doesn't necessarily have to spell this out. They could just be the character that the protagonist has a conversation with and has an aha moment or something like that. On the flip side of the relationship character is the distraction character. This character represents the wrong way of getting past the antagonist or the immoral view of the story. Now, you may be asking, could there be a shared role? Yes, in fact, you can. If you have a very big evil villain character, they might be both the antagonist and the distraction character at the same time. They might be the character that's tempting the main character, the protagonist, to do bad things, and also be the obstacle between the protagonist and what they want. However, often you do have another character here. Classically, you can think of things like the Wizard of Oz and the Witch, or Darth Vader and the Emperor. You know, you'll have two characters that fill a role fill those different roles as well. If you have one where the protagonist is the antagonist also, and you said paranormal romance, I'm guessing it might be some sort of werewolf or Jekyll and Hyde situation. Speaking of Jekyll and Hyde, we're going to look at Jekyll and Hyde in just a little bit when we look at our system and how it analyzes stories. All right, so these are the core characters. They're called the core characters because they move the plot forward. It is very difficult to make a story work without these four characters. In fact, you will find that most short stories, even ones that have a single character mentioned on the page, you will see the shadow of these other characters nonetheless. It is very hard to make a story work without them. I'm not saying it's impossible. Nothing is impossible, right? But it's a lot harder. And generally, I don't like making my life a lot harder when there are tried and true ways of telling a story. Okay. On the other side of the world, the other dimension of the story, so to speak, we have the thematic characters. Now, these characters don't necessarily drive the plot all that much. What they're here to do is to give other perspectives on the story problem and to aid the protagonist on their journey. The support character tends to be the big cheerleader, the person that lifts up the protagonist, tells them you can do whatever it is you're seeking out to do. Sometimes they're like the dog, like Toto or something like that. Then we have the opposition character. This character is here to tell the main character they are not capable of doing what it is they're seeking out to do. They're the big skeptic, somebody like a Han Solo or something like that. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park. And then we have emotion and reason. We have characters who are raising the temperature of scenes. They get very excited, very, very emotional, like Ron and Harry Potter or Chewbacca and Star Wars. And then you have the reason character, the character who wants to logic it out, somebody like a Hermione or something like that. Now, keep in mind when it comes to these archetypes, they don't have to be the extreme most clear version of that archetype, right? And as we go into the analysis, you're going to see how they can form, what you might think of as a more nuanced approach to this. The important thing is that this is how you label them in relationship to each other. So this is the most emotional character of the story. This is the most reason-oriented person in the story. If you have a story where people are not particularly logical in general, somebody who's just slightly more logical may stand out. If you have a book with a whole bunch of extremely logical people, right, then you that reason character might be even more cold and calculated, and often takes on the role of a computer, like often happens in sci-fi, because you often have pretty logical, scientifically oriented characters, right? So it really depends. Samwise, yes, is a wonderful example of a support character. Absolutely beautiful example there. All right. I'm just catching up with some of the comments here. All right, fantastic. So that being said, this is a window into our methodology that we put into the AutoCrit system when helping you develop your characters. And so when it comes to the character development, there's a couple of ways you can go about it from this point. I could either say, all right, I am telling a story, and I can start with like my big what if concept, right? What if mermaids were real, right? And then I could start to think of the type of people that would live in that world. You want to come up with some sort of conflict. What they live in the world. And so therefore what? Therefore, maybe they need to be protected. And so then you can have the protagonist that wants to protect them. Okay, well, what would the antagonist be? The antagonist would be somebody that doesn't care about protecting them, is standing in the way of protecting them because they want to exploit them for some reason. Maybe the distraction character would be somebody that would tempt the main character to, yeah, is it really that big of a deal? Are mermaids really something we need to worry about? Can't you make some money off of it or something like that? The relationship character would be the character that would help the main character learn whatever it is they need to learn. I don't know what's keeping them from stopping the antagonist from harming the mermaids, but whatever that is, the relationship character would be the character that would explain that. And then, of course, you would have your thematic characters. You could have a support character that would motivate the protagonist to, yes, go ahead and try to help the mermaids. You'd have the opposition character that might say, well, yeah, I don't really like what they're doing, but can we really do anything about it anyway? Isn't that kind of not your place or something like that? You could have the emotion character who just raises the temperature, gets really upset about things, about what's going on, and the reason character who might be either good or evil. They could be reason in the sense of wanting to protect the mermaids and being maybe a little apathetic about it or something. Or I'm sorry, they could not be on the side of protecting mermaid, be a little apathetic about it, kind of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, perhaps. Or they could be somebody who is good at coming up with some solutions, maybe is more biologically inclined than the main character, right? They might have a lot of interesting information that would aid the main character. All right, so let's go ahead and go into the AutoCrit system. Now, you can start inside AutoCrit at any part of the writing process. So, for example, in fact, hold on here. I'm actually going to go back to the main page here of AutoCrit. Kind of jump the gun here. So, when you come to the main page of AutoCrit, you can see here we have, story ideas and planning, and then we also have write, revise, and edit or analyze an existing story. So we're going to get to the analyzing an existing story in just a minute. We're going to act like we're starting new, or we're going to do some brainstorming first. Let's start there. So that will be under that yellow button that says new story builder idea. I think I might zoom in a little bit to make it a little bit clearer. I might throw off the display just a little bit, but just bear with me just so it's a little bit easier to read. And then you'll go to new fiction idea, pretty clear there. Now, the way that the story builder works in this format, right? I haven't really come up with anything yet. This is a tool, this is a sandbox that allows you to imagine, okay, what are all the different things that I might do regarding this story? Uh, and it's categorized into the different sections, which is, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, story premise, world building, character building, and then finally a beat sheet. And so let's imagine that I put in the story premise that this is a world where mermaids exist. I could do something as simple as that and start world building, but I could go a little bit more complicated than that. Let's imagine I want to actually like do more of a what if scenario. I want to say, um, in a world where mermaids exist, some people want to exploit their tears for healing properties, while others are concerned about the ethical implications of harming creatures, right? So I could start there. If I do that and I actually go back here and I go back to the premise, it should give me, yep. So it's going to say a young mermaid named Marina, and then she sits out a find a way to harness and use the tears, Captain Blackbird, and Captain Planet. Okay, perhaps I'd want to go this way, or perhaps not. Somebody is asking, what if you're a panther? Is there a simple version? If you are somebody who flies by the seat of your pants, you may want to do this in a different way, and I'll show you in a minute. But keep in mind, it's only as intense as you want, right? If I just wanted as a pantser to be like a few words, you could do that. The story premise is up to 2,500 characters. So it could be the equivalent of a log line. That's fine. But you can go a lot deeper if you want. You could go as deep as 2,500 characters. And the reason why you might want to do that is if you're going to be using the Inspiration Studio to get some inspiration for some characters, then what you'll want to do is, give it more information. You'll get more specific suggestions and things like that. Yes, AutoCrit just did write that story premise. Right. If I refresh it again, it'll give me another one based on that. See, Lily, a young healer, discovers the healing properties of mermaid tears and wants to use them to save their dying sister. Right. Similar premise, but not exactly the same. Right. It's really stuck on the name Lily for some reason. It's very interesting. And so if I go down to character building and I go to protagonist, it'll give me some suggestions, right? Now, the great thing about this is that you can use the suggestions that it gives you, or you can modify them, right? It's a great skeleton starting point because we have what is their want? To study mermaids' tears for their healing properties in order to advance her career. Her skill is proficient in marine biology and a deep connection with the ocean. Her flaws, she's naive and overly trusting, especially when it comes to research goals. Is their want their need? Yes, as Lily believes they're, and so on and so forth. Well, I could go ahead and I could decide that some of these are not quite what I want. And then I would go in and you can edit them and things like that. For one, I think Lily Waters is a little on the nose, right? I mean, let's just make it Lily Rogers. Waters just feels like, okay, it's about water. I don't know if I quite need that. I like the long flowing hair that mimic ocean waves when she moves. Fair enough. That's kind of cute and things like that. What else do I possibly want to do? I would say instead of her flaw being naive and overly trusting, I would say she is a workaholic and often isolates herself from others who would benefit her in her quest for her goals. It's not like super clear, but it's okay. It's just for an outline purpose. All right, so the antagonist. This has a ruthless woman, Veronica. Sure, let's find out more about Veronica. What is it going to say? But the cool thing is that, I didn't have to start with quite as little as I had. I could have had all of my protagonists involved. I could have had all my antagonists. I could have had my protagonist, antagonist, relationship character, and distraction character, and then just started to use the generations for the other characters, right? It's really up to you how much you want to use it. And you could just not use any of the ideas and use it as a wonderful template to get started as well. Is it interrelated? Indeed, it is. Correct. So, like, if I ultimately say she's a workaholic and is self-served from others who would benefit her quest from the goals, particularly, she should listen to John's advice about networking with political figures, even though she tends to be skeptical, right? So if I do that, and if I go down to relationship character, my guess is that it'll pick it up and it'll say John. Let's see. That's the goal. Yep, it did. John. And so now it says, it's her mentor, guiding her on ethical paths. He encourages her to consider the consequences in exploiting magical creatures, right? So, it actually does follow your advice. That's the point, right? It's an assistant. Ultimately, what our goal is here at AutoCrit is to provide tools for assisted character development. And so, again, you could come in, imagine you're writing a series, right? You could come in here with a protagonist and all of the characters from your first book, and maybe it would give you a new insight into the next character. I mean, imagine you're writing an episodic sort of detective series. Often in those, the protagonist, relationship character, all of those characters stay the same, and you just hit the button. It's that simple. It is that simple. It's just hitting a button. That's right. Because again, these systems were infused with with our ideology, or whatever you want to say, our methodology for creating characters. And so it's going to do a lot of that and give you some ideas. And the nice thing is it even goes further, right? So it'll give you things like your distraction character. So who might be somebody that would tempt her? So Finn encourages her to outsmart her using unethical means. Well, that would be very interesting, right? And it gives you some physical characteristics. It says that his charismatic nature makes viewers intrigued by his unpredictable behavior and things like that. What if there is a different couple in each book of the series? That is a wonderful idea. So, what you would want to do in a situation like that is more than likely, if you're talking about like a romance series, often the continuing factor, the whatever you want to say, the overlap is the world, right? And then you'd go into the world building. So you would say, where is this place? What kind of animals live there? What's the general culture and things like that, right? And you have 2,500 characters, so you can go into a fair amount of detail on that. And then in something like the story premise, you would say this is a romance story that takes place in the town of X, and it has. And the thing about the story premise is you can give it all kinds of information about the tone, the style you want, right? You'll notice there isn't like a genre thing. Put that in the premise. So if it's like this is a romance suspense story, put that in. If you could say, this is a cozy mystery story, you could put that in and things like that. Of course, when you get down to the beat sheet, you can get specific beats based on it in different story types. So currently, I have it here under plot centered. I'm not going to spend too much time on beats because this is really more about characters. But if I did the inciting incident for this mermaid story, it would be she witnesses a group of mermaids being captured by a team of poachers, realizing the dangers they face, and she can no longer uh, observe from a distance. Makes a lot of sense, right? What would spur into action? Some sort of atrocity. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But again, it gives you some suggestions, right? And it gives you things to think about. What is the urgency and the stakes? What's the emotional impact? What are the hint at the consequences of what happens later in the story? And again, you can either use these ideas or you can use it to modify and come up with your own ideas. It's all about that inspiration and keeping that flow going. Now, if I go back up to the story beats and I were to pick a romance, well, now it's going to give me cues with those same characters for a romance. So if I do a meet cute, my guess is that she's going to end up with John. We're going to find out. But it may be somebody else. Oh, it's actually Finn. That's interesting. So this is interesting. So what it would be is some sort of situation where uh, they're going to have a disagreement, and then she's going to have to bring Finn over to their side and things like that. But again, he playfully challenges their theories about marine life and things like that. And ultimately, it'll steer you to a happily ever after or happily for now ending as a good romance would. And, I could do the same thing with a mystery as well, where I could end up with some sort of mystery that they have to solve, like a murder or something like that. A renowned marine biologist is found unconscious. And so now uh, you have something like that. With the program, this is a good question. Would the program give the same story to two different authors? What would keep people from writing similar stories? Truth be told, is that if you went in there and you said, I want a mermaid story with this in the setting and things like that, there is a possibility that you would come up with similar suggestions, right? But that would be the same thing if you just thought about a mermaid story and somebody else thought about a mermaid story at the same time as well, right? And a lot of times ideas are just ideas, not to discredit them, but ideas are not the same as execution. So this is not actually writing your prose for you. It's not going to start writing sentences and chapters and things like that. And that tends to be where the differences of authors lie, right? Because we can all point to stories where they have very similar premises, similar plot points, but it's the execution that makes it completely different. It does not have the same feeling. I mean, think of how many romance stories essentially have similar concepts in terms of the societal things that are keeping the couple apart or the ideological differences in the couple or things like that, but it's the tone and it's the style. So to that point, that is a great question, Diane. And one thing I would say is that if you want highly specific ideas that are not going to fly at that high generic sort of level, that means that you need to go in there too, right? Don't just sit back. That's not what we're recommending here. Don't just sit back and just hit the button for everything, right? Use it as an assistant. And the more you give it that's specific, the less it's going to resemble something anybody else could get because they wouldn't think of that, right? I could immediately establish that the main character comes from an interesting background or has interesting characteristics or it's an interesting setting or things like that. And yeah, if you did all of that, well, it's not going to be the same. But that is a great, great question. All right. So this is the story builder. So this is a way of interacting with story builder, but it's not the only way. I want to show you another way of interacting with the story builder because somebody was mentioning pantsing and that's fine. So let's imagine that I am a pantser, right? Another way you can use the story builder is alongside your um, writing right here in the writer's desk. So imagine that I had done my whole mermaid story and I liked it. I could go to continue building in here, pick it out, and now it's going to live on the side. But let's imagine I wanted to start a new one. And so I'm just pantsing over here. I'm like, okay, this and this and this happens. So as I write, I can literally go over here and I can just keep track of things. I can say, okay, I've now written that this story takes place in mountains. And I could say, it takes place in the mountains, and things like that. And I could say, there's a deer, right? And and things like that. And I can keep track. And as I keep track, I can use this to build more ideas. So I could say, let's imagine I start the story and I have a person named Mary. And then I could ultimately say, all right, what's Mary's problem? Mary doesn't realize that she is actually the secret heir to the throne or something like that, right? And then I could say the first scene, Mary gets a letter that informs her that she is the heir to the throne. And I wrote all of this. And let's say I want to go a little bit more in terms of, takes place in the mountains. I would say Switzerland sort of setting. Okay. So now I could go up to the story premise and I could get an idea from all of that, right? And now I'm getting some more things here. I could go back down to general geography, and now it's going to give me a richer thing about Switzerland, right? And it's, and I'm just doing it as I track. And then imagine I get to the next story beat, and I'm like, I don't know what should happen next. You could hit the button, and then you could get some ideas, right? And so on and so forth. So it'll pace with you, right? And this is just automatically connected to your document. You can close it out and you can go back into it and then you can see where you're at and things like that for sure. People are asking about specific genres. If you're thinking about specific genres, right? So if it's like not just romance, somebody said paranormal erotic romance, you'd want to put that in the premise. So put it in the premise somewhere that this is an erotic romance. And then it will steer the ideas in that direction. And space opera. Yeah, I mean, something like a space opera would either be a character journey or a plot journey. But again, you would put that in the premise and things like that. Writing on the site does remain private as well. And no, the inputs are not used to train AI. Can you use this for a short story? You can. So we do have short story beats. Keep in mind that it can be a little bit challenging to keep the story beats that are giving you suggestions from getting too big because that's its whole goal, right? Its whole goal is to expand the story out. So because of that, sometimes it goes a little bit away from you and you may need to curb it back. So you'll just have to edit that. But yeah, of course, it'll give you all kinds of suggestions on things like that. How do you move the content into the document? Well, if you want to take it out of here, so let's imagine that you're not a huge fan of like you don't want to use it like this. You can either copy it to a note, which will put it on the note boards, or you can copy it to your clipboard if you really wanted to just stick it, in your document. Keep in mind, though, this is giving you ideas. This is not going to give you actual like sentences of your book. That's not its goal. Its goal is to be inspirational. It should not. Somebody's asking, will it kind of limit you? Will it censor you as an artist? It should not. It's possible that there are certain things that you could come up with that maybe you would be offended by, but I can tell you that I've done things where, I had to have a character, I wanted to have a character that was prejudiced or racist as, a villain character, of course. And yeah, it was fine with that. It understands fiction. It understands that people write about things that could be viewed that way, viewed offensively by some, or out of context would be viewed like that. So I would challenge it to do it and see what happens. I think you might be surprised at how much it will actually obey what you're looking for. Nonfiction writing. Yes, we do have tools for nonfiction writing. If you want, you can go back on this channel and you can find videos where we discuss that, for sure. It's a different sort of process, as you might imagine, right? Because often what you're dealing with in nonfiction is persuading somebody to a concept or an opinion or an effective way of relaying information. So the builders are still there. I could show you it really quick, but the nonfiction story builder is going to be things like topic, knowledge level of the audience, how to establish credibility for yourself, and then the outlines are persuasive, informational, and self-help and things like that. So for sure. All right. So that being said, so this is a way, like I said, for pantsers to enjoy this. What you'd want to do is go through, write it up, and keep track on the right hand side, right? And just go back and forth. And then whenever you get stuck, you can go to the inspiration and you could decide at any point, you know what, I'm going to refresh that protagonist and it'll keep all the information now, but it might give me some informations might give me some suggestions I haven't thought about before. Somebody saying what happens next always has aliens. The outlandish suggestion for what happens next often does lean towards aliens because that's pretty outlandish. Not always, though, but you'll notice there are other ones that are more straightforward in the what happens next. That's a different tool that's under inspiration. But yeah, so that's the story builder. So the next step is, okay, so what happens when I'm done with everything? What if that's where you're at right now? What if you've actually written the whole story and you're like, this is all well and good for my next book, but I got something right now and I want to know what I have, right? I want to be able to use tools to extract some information. And for some people, that might be the entire way they use it, right? They love to do everything on their own creatively, but they want the analysis, right? They want a developmental editor, a beta reader at their fingertips. So that's where our story analyzer comes into play. So, for example, this is the Dr. Jekyll and Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde. So I ran this through the story analyzer here. Let me go ahead and pull this out, make it a little bit bigger. And I have different levels of analysis that I can do. Hold on here. I think I hit the button. Okay. So I have a chapter analysis that goes through chapter by chapter. I have the overall analysis, which I actually haven't ran yet, but that would give you things like the premise and the conflict and things like that. Today, though, I'm focused on character. So it'll give you analysis of the characters. So let's see how it does for Jekyll and Hyde. It says Dr. Henry Jekyll's primary desire is to separate his darker impulses from a respectable persona, allowing him to indulge in unsanctioned pleasures without tarnishing his reputation or conscience. This quest for dual existence underpins the narrative, right? And, that's a pretty good arc there. And then it says it's a moral descending character arc, spiraling downward as Hyde gains more control over their shared existence. The pivotal moment occurs in chapter 10, where Jekyll details how each transformation into Hyde became less about choice and more about necessity. So the nice thing about this is that it not only gives you a sense of where the arc is going. Is this a transformation to better? Is this a tragedy where it's getting worse? But it tells you where it happens. You obviously, this is a short story, so there's not as many pivot points as in a fuller work, which we'll get to in a moment. We have longer ones. But you'll notice, where the chapter is, maybe that's not pacing wise where you wanted it. Chapter 10 is towards the end of this book. Well, I guess it's a novella, excuse me. It's not a short story. And so, it says there's inconsistencies in a way, because there's Jekyll's attempt at redemption following violent acts committed by Hyde instead of seeking help or confessing, right? Which you could say, well, right, that's a failing. The inconsistency report is going to show you where people are not behaving logically. Of course, people don't always behave logically, and that can be, in fact, helpful. Yes, this is a great question, Rainey. You're doing fantastic at these questions. If we use AutoCrit to help us write your book, when you publish it, you would need to pick the AI assisted. Correct. This is our goal, right? Currently, the way that Amazon categorizes books, there is AI written and there's AI assisted. We are not there are not tools within AutoCrit that actually do the writing for you. This is assisted. This is no different than if you went to a developmental editor and got ideas, or went to friends, or things like that, or just was inspired to do a retelling. I mean, there's whole retellings. Walt Disney made a whole career out of retelling stories that already existed. Nothing wrong with getting ideas from all kinds of sources, right? The important thing is that you are doing the writing. And yes, it is still written by you. Generative AI. That is correct. All right. So it gives you the different archetypes. Now, remember at the beginning, I talked about the different archetypes, antagonist relationship. Now, what's interesting is in this situation, it does clearly identify that Hyde is the antagonist, right? Because he is. He is the personification of of the main obstacle, which is the embodiment of repressed desires that become increasingly uncontrollable. So it is wise enough to understand that the main character can, in fact, be their own antagonist when it's a personification, right? This is unusual in that a lot of times, yes, people have shortcomings to get better at, but it's not like they really are their own antagonist. This, of course, is a classic example where that is the case, right? And it even gives a suggestion of how characters might do a better job of working. And you could say, how could it do that when it's a classic? Again, this is telling you if they want to be a better example of this sort of archetype, which maybe you don't actually want them to be that on the nose, right? They're directionally that way, but they're not like the pinnacle example of these things, right? Again, you have to find a standard so that we can analyze it against something. Otherwise, it's like, are the characters good? And how would it know, right? So, what we're doing is we're asking it, are these fitting these archetypes? And it'll give you some suggestions. And then you, as the author, get to decide how much do I want to lean into like the purest version of these archetypes or not, and things like that. There is not a limit for the overall work, but you do need to make sure that each chapter is less than 10,000 words. Now, typically that is the case. Not a lot of people write chapters longer than 10,000 words, uh, but um, but if you do, you will need to chop that up. So you'll have to do like a chapter 10.5 or something like that. Also, keep in mind it will automatically find the chapters for you if they're labeled as chapter. If they are not, then you will need to go back into your document and put in the labels as chapter or add chapters through our system. Okay. Otherwise, it'll say it's too long. Now, if it's a short story, it'll say, I don't have any chapters. Is this a short story? And you'll say yes. And then it'll just run it as one thing. Again, though, the short story can't be over 10,000 words or you need to split it up. So even though it's not technically a chapter for the purpose of the system, again, it's complicated analyzing all this, as you can imagine. So we do keep it at 10,000 words for various reasons. And so, yeah, you'll need to just put in those headers. Very simple. Very simple. Does it work for scripts? Yes, it will in fact work for. Again, though, you need to think about the 10,000 words, and so I know scripts don't usually have chapters. They'll have like scenes or something like that. Just keep in mind every 10,000 words you'll need to put in a chapter. And keep in mind that even though it'll work on some of these high level things, it is geared more towards prose than it is a script format. And so there may be certain things that it might be a little bit wonky about. Yes, it is quite fast. You have a chapter already written, but you feel unsure about. Does it offer suggestions as to what might make it work better? Yes. So if I go back to the chapter here, so if I go to chapter 1, what it'll do is it'll give me a synopsis of what happens. So this is just a what happens, which is still really helpful, helps you keep track as you go, right? And then it's going to give you an idea of conflict. So immediately I'd look at this and I would say, what are the conflicts? Are they interesting? Is it picking up on stuff? Does it say there aren't any conflicts? In which case it's probably boring or things like that. Who are the characters? It'll talk about the world building. And then it'll give you some potential contradiction events, things that it doesn't seem to add up. It'll give you a timeline, and then it will give you foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is very important. It doesn't know what the future of the story is when it reads it. We ask it to read it like a reader. So chapter 1 is chapter 1. It doesn't know what happens in the rest of the book yet. And so it's going to guess. It's going to say, I would assume that these sort of things, right? The sinister block of building with a neglected door hints at hidden ominous events. Well, did you want that? Or is it actually a happy go lucky story and sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows? In which case, that's not totally what I wanted, right? In which case, you'd want to adjust that, right? But it makes sense that a reader would think that if you have a neglected door on a quiet street, right? That's pretty creepy. The other thing that it'll do is the plot thread tracking. It'll say it raises questions, it leaves the audience wondering about things like that. Exactly. Yeah. The plot thread section is great for identifying broken threads and so on. And then it'll give you a genre, right? And it says that this is a mystery, right? I'm assuming later it's going to actually pivot to something a little darker than that. Yep. And then it moves to mystery and psychological thriller. And that's fine. Maybe tonally you're not like trying to be like all in balls to the wall thriller, right? You're like mystery and then it gets more intense. That's fine, but maybe you didn't want that. Maybe you wanted to be like all the way intense at the beginning. In which case, maybe you need to turn up the temperature early on. All right, I do have some other examples that I want to go ahead and get into before we run out of time here. So this is the time traveler. So this is I'm sorry, the time machine. So this one is interesting because this is a different arc. This is a transformational character arc evolving significantly from an overconfident scientist to someone profoundly affected by his journeys, right? He's initially focused by proving his theories in chapter 1, and then he is introspective on seeing humanity's decline, and then he has a horror of the fate, and then he has reflective moments after returning home where he ponders about what he has learned about life's impermanence. And that's really great, right? And of course, this is a classic, right? But you can see how it's spread along those points. You had that decline, right, all the way to towards the end of the book where it's looking rather dire. It has the typical sort of story arc that you would expect. The character archetypes, there's the protagonist, the time traveler, the antagonist, the warlocks, the relationship character Weena, which of course makes a lot of sense if you know the work. And it's interesting is, it gives suggestions. Again, it's always going to give suggestions. It's like, so don't think because it's giving you suggestions that something is wrong. This is a classic, right? But it's always just going to give you suggestions because that's what we asked it to do. So it's saying, well, if you had more scenes with Murloc society, you could have more insight into their motivations and making them more than just monstrous obstacles. But I do believe that that was the actual goal of the author, right? He wanted them to be mysterious and monstrous and not human and not very understandable. That was the whole premise. And so, therefore, no, analyzer, I'm not going to do that because I don't actually care about that, right? If I did want to do that, of course, that would make sense, but that's not my goal and things like that, for sure. Let me look and see if I think I missed a question from somebody. You have 31 chapters in your Word documents of memoir. How do you upload the slew into the writer's desk? Uh, yeah, if you uploaded each one of those individually, of course they would stay individual, right? So if you could pile them first by copying and pasting them into a single document and then uploaded the single document, then in the writer's desk, you will see all the analysis of each chapter individually because it'll break it up by chapter. So that's what I would recommend. I know there's a little bit of work involved to compile those chapters together. Otherwise, though, what you could do is upload every chapter individually into the writer's desk and just keep it under the same project. And you just have to keep that in mind as you go through. It's not going to be able to give you an overall analysis, though. It'll treat the overall analysis of the book, and the characters involved, which it would still do a character analysis on something like a memoir if you wanted it. It would only know what's in that chapter. So I really recommend compiling it first and then putting it in. Hold on. Do you only analysis after you finish your first draft? You don't have to. You can do it in the middle of a draft. If you go as far as it is, though, keep in mind it's only going to know as much as you have. So it might say, this is a, whatever, this is a tragic character arc because it ends in failure, because it doesn't know you're eventually going to change it. Now, sometimes it can kind of guess that. It'll be like, this seems like part of a series or something like that. And yeah, because the book's not over. But that's the only thing you have to keep in mind. But it will tell you everything up to that point. It'll tell you who the protagonist is, who's the antagonist. The other thing is that the antagonist could shift by the end of the story, because there are characters that might be a bit of an obstacle at the beginning. And if that's the biggest obstacle the character has faced, it'll say that's the antagonist. But it could be by the end of the story, there's a bigger character that's more of a problem. And then that will become the main antagonist of the story and things like that. Correct. If you have a book of 300,000 words, it will analyze the whole thing. Correct. It might take a few minutes to do that, but I do believe it would work. I don't think I've attempted a 300,000 word book, but I have attempted over 200,000 and not had problems. This all everything I'm showing today, the analyzer and the builder, is based on a membership to AutoCrit. We do have free tools like just the regular writing space and the note board, but no, these specific tools are a member benefit. Okay, let's move on. I have another example. This is Anne of Green Gables. So this is a different sort of story, right? You could argue maybe a little bit less detectable in terms of who are villains or things like that. And what you'll notice is that it actually drops the antagonist, and instead it goes very abstract. And so it says societal expectations and prejudices. Well, not a person. The societal expectations and prejudice faces act as the main obstacle. However, you could say Gilbert Blythe could be seen as the antagonist initially due to the rivalry, but he transforms into a different role. Interesting, right? So again, it's not going to force it if it can't really find a clear thing. And I can understand why it wouldn't in something like Anne of Green Gables, which doesn't necessarily have a bad guy or even a central force that she has to like overcome or anything like that, right? It is a more nuanced work in that way. Yeah, no, it doesn't. It says, it's a concept and things like that. Of course, the other characters make a lot of sense. Marilla being the guide for Anne, teaching her practical life lessons makes a lot of sense. The support character being Matthew makes a lot of sense. The opposition characters being Rachel Lynn makes a lot of sense. Emotion character being Diana Barry, fair enough. Reason character Miss Stacy, sure. You know, uh, now there might be times that you might be like, I don't know if I'd quite orient it that way. Again, when you're talking about art, you're learning how to talk about it, right? It's not like there is an exact science. In fact, there are different ways, different archetypes that you could extrapolate the story. But the important thing is that it gives you something to think about, right? And it even gives you a sense on how you could expand on it if you wanted to, right? And again, the fact that it's giving us suggestions for masterpieces of literature is not an indication that the system is doing anything wrong. It's just always going to give suggestions, right? And so keep that in mind. Don't let it like bully you and being like, oh no, it's telling me I'm not doing it good enough. No, no, no. It is giving you suggestions if you wanted to, right? Additional moments where Matthew actively defends or champions Anne's actions. He certainly does that a lot, but it's just saying you could do more. Yes, you could always do more, right? And so if you see something like this, you'd be like, yeah, he already does that a lot. You'd be like, yeah, I don't think I need to lean into that more. I think I'm doing that well. I'm pleased with my results, right? And things like that. Of course, if you come up with a story and it doesn't give you a lot of these archetypes at all, it's like I can't find them. You might have characters that are too similar to each other or a little bit bland, right? In which case you might want to turn up that temperature. You might want to make a character that's a little bit clearer to be the support, or clearer to be the emotion, or clearer to be the reason, for distinctive purposes. And you might find that to be really helpful. I have. The other thing that you might have happen to you is, you can always run these reports again if you don't like the results, and you can think about it. So you go to generate analysis and it'll redo it. The thing when you do that is almost like giving it to a new reader, because we're asking it to clear the slate, think about it, and it's not going to give you the same result necessarily. Now, I'm curious if I hit this, if it's going to give me a wildly different result. It shouldn't do that. Although, of course, people do have different reactions. But sometimes some of the characters can shift around. One thing I would be wondering is if eventually, if I ran it enough times, if it would think about the antagonist in a different way or not. That would be kind of curious. I haven't actually ran this particular piece a whole bunch of times. Anyway, any comments before we keep going? We are getting low on time. I certainly appreciate you having you here for this. Aha, so this time it actually leaned into the antagonist being Gilbert, which I can understand that to some degree. I could kind of understand. I kind of see it that way. It's a little bit of a hate to love relationship sort of story. But you'll notice last time it said it's society, but it could be them, but I don't know. And that would be the same thing that different readers might give you for that. So, keep that in mind as well. Yeah, it's like having multiple beta readers, right? And the other characters remain the same. Relationship character Marilla, support character Matthew, opposition, all of the others remain the same. So it's clearly right there in the wheelhouse for that. I do wanted to do if you're like me and at the point you don't even know if your novel is any good. Exactly. This is the goal, right? Again, AI assisted, right? What if you have a wonderful idea and you're like, I just don't know, is this working, is this good? You can ship it out to developmental editors, you could ship it out to beta readers, but sometimes maybe you don't want to do that just yet. You want to make sure it's great before you get others involved. That's time, that's possibly money, right? That's potentially your reputation, as it were, right? You might be a little bit nervous, so this is a great way of getting that sort of feedback. Somebody's asking about publishers and whether or not they would appreciate some of these assisted tools. You would have to ask on an individual basis, but keep in mind, generally what they're concerned about is generative text. It's the idea that you did not, in fact, write your ideas. That is the number one concern that I know of, but it will vary based on organizations. And of course, it's going to continue to shift as technology shifts. So what might be okay today may not be tomorrow, and vice versa, and things like that. I do want to give a shout out for an upcoming workshop that we're going to do. It's starting on Sunday. So if you've enjoyed my comments about this and you'd like to learn some more, we have the Heroes and Villains workshop. And that, whoops, sorry, I disappeared. And that will be starting on Sunday at 8 p.m. And then there's also the first session. We repeat it on Tuesday at 11 a.m. So if this is more kind of your window of time, you can come at either time. It's a two-parter. So one part is going to be heroes, protagonists, not necessarily goody two-shoe heroes, but protagonists. And then the second part is going to be villains and or antagonists. All right, so definitely join us for that if you can. Of course, if you've enjoyed any of these tools, head on over to AutoCrit, right? AutoCrit.com, and you can sign up and you can start experiencing all of this for yourself. Immediately, you can jump in and you can start running the analyzer like I showed you. I can go ahead and show you that. Like if you wanted to jump right into the analyzer, because that's where you're at in your story process right now, you can literally upload it and it'll send you directly into the analyzer. You don't have to do any of that other stuff there. You will find it. Oops, sorry. This blue button, analyze an existing story. You'll just hit this button. It'll prompt you to upload your document, and then you can immediately get some results. Keep wanting to make myself disappear. All right. And Currently, you can sign up in the system. We have a great trial offer. You can sign up for just $15. And that's an amazing deal because you literally could go in there and analyze your whole book and find out so much information for that. So I do recommend checking that out for sure. And so, yeah, go ahead and check it out. If you have any other questions, going to be wrapping up here in a second because actually at 2 o'clock, we do our office hours for our AutoCrit members. So if you're an AutoCrit member, you can feel free to continue the conversation. I'll be showing off these tools over there because we did just launch them. These are brand new. We're very excited about them. If you want to like and subscribe and hit the bell, we're going to continue to show off some features next week. I'm going to be looking at analyzing your plot. Some people were talking about that. We are going to look at that within the writing desk as well. Later on, we're going to look at how the writer's desk helps your actual writing. And what it does is there's a lot of automated reports that help you see at a word choice level what you could be doing better. Again, all author controlled, nothing it's not automatically making decisions for you. It's going to give you a lot of different suggestions as well. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. You have a wonderful day. I will see you all around AutoCrit, I hope. Bye, everyone.